Committee is in order. Where do U.S. interests lie in the current chaos afflicting the Palestinians? It is a difficult question. Each answer comes with political dilemmas and moral hazards. Although we are not responsible for the choices made by others, there is no avoiding the fact that a good deal of responsibility for the status quo lies at our feet. The emergence of a new Palestinian leadership committed to peace in January 2005 provoked little response from the United States beyond rhetoric alone. We did not perceive the fragility and significance of the moment, and within a year, it was lost. By January 2006, the inability of the Palestinian Authority to deliver political goods from Israel, the inability of the PA to tackle internal corruption or to produce economic recovery or personal security left Palestinians angry and ready to make changes. And thanks to the Bush administration, which chose to ignore both good sense and the specific terms of the Oslo agreements, when Palestinians went to the polls, Hamas was on the ballot, providing a ready outlet for the frustrations of the Palestinian people. When the Palestinian people chose to empower Hamas, they implicitly, and perhaps unknowingly, sent a number of messages to the rest of the world. Messages about the acceptability of terrorists and terrorism, about the durability of past commitments, and about their relationship with the world. Most Palestinians had more narrow objectives in their votes, but elections have consequences no less for Palestinians than for ourselves in the United States. A legitimate election doesn't absolve candidates of their crimes, and there is more to democracy than a fair counting of ballots. Elected terrorists are still terrorists. The consequences of the Palestinian elections have been dire. Israel stopped transferring tax revenues, and the movement of goods in and out of the Palestinian areas has slowed to a stagnant crawl. The United States acted to prevent bank transfers to the Hamas-led PA, and Congress has required that U.S. assistance be given only through non-governmental organizations or to the office of President Mahmoud Abbas. To provide humanitarian assistance to the Palestinian people, together with our Quartet partners, we have established a temporary international mechanism to deliver aid. The TIM, or the TIM, initially established in June 2006, allowed approximately $900 million in emergency assistance to be spent in the West Bank and Gaza by the end of last year. By comparison, in 2005, total PA revenue from taxes, transferred custom duties, and foreign aid amounted to $1.3 billion, with another $700 million coming from commercial loans and proceeds from the Palestinian Investment Fund. So today, instead of an economy, the Palestinians have a Tim Cup. Instead of a unity government, they have warlords and clan leaders. They've replaced negotiations with Israel with fighting among themselves. Palestinians who once rightfully boasted of their high levels of education and cultural sophistication are now commonly compared to the hapless residents of Afghanistan and Somalia. Instead of being schooled in coexistence and peace, Palestinian children now get instruction in genocide and the joy of suicide bombing from Mickey Mouse's evil cousin, Farfar, the Hamas TV terror mouse, creating another lost generation. For the ordinary Palestinian, nothing is better, and almost everything is worse. Yet who do they blame? The United States, Bush, Olmert, Abu Mazen, the PA, the Arabs, the Quartet, the weather, New York Yankees, anyone and everyone except Hamas. And how is Hamas responding to the crisis? The same way they always do. Hamas may have emerged as a political actor, but they still have only one strategy. It's don't just stand there, kill some Jews. Not surprisingly, scarcely a day has gone by during the so-called ceasefire when the 40,000 Israelis living in Sderot have had to flee Palestinian rocket fire from Gaza. Instead of baiting the IDF to invade, Hamas only cleared the way for the IDF to resume targeted killings. Richly deserved, probably necessary, but ultimately sterile. Into this maelstrom of chaos and bloodletting, the Bush administration has proposed a set of benchmarks to facilitate greater Palestinian freedom of movement. The plan is heavy on administrative details and light on political reality. Variously described as informal, flexible, and iterative, the benchmarks overwhelmingly focus on specific and often risky action items for Israel and on fuzzy, notional aspirations for the forces under the control of President Abbas. Yet again, I'm afraid we have slaughtered more trees to print paper that will fill the graveyard of stillborn American security plans. To be clear, I am not opposed to benchmarks or security plans, and I certainly agree that both Israelis and Palestinians have to take responsibility for improving their shared misfortune. Reciprocity is the only way out of this mire. If the past year has shown nothing else, it has demonstrated clearly the perils of unilateralism. Given the level of the PA's dysfunctionality, unilateralism was an experiment worth trying, but the results are now clear, and they are overwhelmingly negative. Politically, diplomatically, and militarily, unilateralism has strengthened radicals, weakened moderates, undercut Israeli deterrence, and contributed little to Israeli security. Getting out of Gaza was worth doing, but in the long term, I see little prospect for Israel to achieve durable improvements in security without the cooperation of an effective Palestinian partner. And here we come to the heart of the matter. There is no such effective Palestinian partner. By virtue of the decisions and the mischances of the past, American, Israeli, Arab, and Palestinian, the Palestinian Authority is in danger of complete collapse. It may be just a shell today, but even that shell is now in danger of disintegration. It is this fact, more than any other, that gives an air of unreality to the so-called access and movement benchmarks. In the totality, whether they are informal, inflexible, or iterative, they are built on a flawed premise. They confuse symptoms with causes. The lack of access and movement is a problem, but it is not the problem. The problem is a Palestinian Authority without a singular and exclusive authority. The problem is a political void that is being relentlessly expanded and filled by Hamas. And unless we can propose a plan that will address the problem, I fear our waste paper graveyard is going to keep pace with the real ones. I would like now to turn to my very distinguished and good friend from Indiana, the ranking member of the committee, Mr. Pence, for whatever comments he may wish to make.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and allow me to apologize for my tardiness to you and to this extraordinarily distinguished panel. I want the members of the panel not to feel any excessive confidence because they outnumber the members of Congress. I found that the presence of the chairman is a quorum, as it proved today. Today's situation in Gaza is troubling. Violence is unfolding as we speak at this very hour. The bloody factional cross-currents have turned into a, quote, situation of total anarchy, as our witness, General Dayton, describes it. And I cannot think of better words. Hamas has waged war on Israel and rival Palestinian factions simultaneously in just the last few weeks. The only, quote, good news, such as it is that it did not have the rapid success it might have expected and desired. Thankfully, Hamas was stopped at the Karni crossing as the forces of President Mahmoud Abbas' Presidential Guard prevailed, as General Dayton will testify shortly. The larger challenge before us, it seems to me today, is how to continue to isolate Hamas without punishing the Palestinian people. Our efforts to financially cut off Hamas have borne some fruit. At the same time, overall aid to the Palestinians has increased. It is troubling that Hamas, however, appears to have a deep supply of weaponry and equipment, and I look forward to asking our panel about that. Our witnesses correctly cite the necessity of basic security being in place before a dire economic situation can be addressed. This vexing condition has plagued the Palestinians for some time now. Some of their leaders would rather wage war on each other and Israel than have a society where basic rights and freedoms are protected. Somewhere between autocracy and Islamism, certainly there must be a renewed Arab civilization waiting to emerge. I believe it with all my heart. Mr. Chairman, all our witnesses make reference to the President's vision of two states living side by side in peace and security, and yet there is a mismatch when one party rejects the other party's right to exist. Edmund Burke famously said, "The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing." And I would also parenthetically add, the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is when evil men do everything. I'm not suggesting that President Mahmoud Abbas has done nothing, but his response to the forces of evil have been sometimes tepid and sporadic. His governance has left a lot to be desired. He's been unable to get his government to agree to the quartet's basic preconditions for the resumption of aid. He must take steps to reform his own ranks and strengthen his own forces in curbing terrorism, and he should denounce anti-American, anti-Jewish incitement recently voiced by the Speaker of the Parliament on Palestinian Authority television, just to name one example. I exhort the responsible and civilized elements of the Palestinian leadership to step forward and assert themselves, but it's not enough to be a critic. Our witnesses today, I suspect, will help us find a way to advance shared goals. I hope we can discuss how to strengthen the forces of reform, how we can grow the ranks of Palestinian moderates that Ambassador Welch refers to. Mr. Chairman, I thank all of our witnesses for their service, but permit me to especially single out General Dayton. He is rightly respected by both sides in this Congress as an honest broker and, in the best sense of the word, a man who's advanced our national security. He follows in the footsteps of General Zinni, George Tenet, Philip Habib, and others who have fulfilled a critical role in democracy while preserving U.S. interests. Look forward to our witness testimony.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pence. I'm now pleased to turn to our very distinguished and extremely patient witnesses, some of whom were here only a few weeks ago to discuss the situation in Lebanon, and I want to begin by thanking Ambassador Welch, who in between hearings actually went to Lebanon, spoke out very forcefully and effectively on behalf of the Senora government. Since March of 2005, Ambassador David Welch has served as Assistant Secretary of State for Near Eastern Affairs. Previously, Ambassador Welch served as Assistant Secretary of State for International Organizations and as United States Ambassador to Egypt. Ambassador Welch also served for 2 years as Chargé d'Affaires in Saudi Arabia, senior staff positions in the State Department at the National Security Council, and in a number of diplomatic posts in the Middle East. It is a pleasure to welcome him back to the subcommittee. Lieutenant General Keith Dayton is the United States Security Coordinator for Israel and the Palestinian Authority. General Dayton began his service in field artillery, rising to become commander of Division Artillery for the 3rd Infantry Division. In addition to his command experience, General Dayton has served in a number of senior staff positions in the Pentagon and in the Defense Intelligence Agency, including service as United States Defense Attaché in Russia. Before undertaking his current post, General Dayton served as the director of the Iraq Survey Group during Operation Iraqi Freedom. He is a graduate of the College of William & Mary and holds a master's degree from Cambridge University and the University of Southern California. We'll also hear from Mr. Mark Ward, Senior Deputy Assistant Administrator for USAID's Bureau for Asia and the Near East. Mr. Ward chairs USAID's Lebanon Reconstruction Task Force, having previously led AID's task force efforts in 2005 to respond to the Southeast Asian tsunami and the South Asian earthquake. Mr. Ward is a career minister in the Senior Foreign Service and has served in Pakistan, Egypt, the Philippines, and Russia. Without objection, each of your full statements will be placed in the record, and I would ask you to summarize your remarks. Welcome to each and all of you, and we will begin with Secretary Walsh.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Congressman Pence. My full statement having been submitted for the record, I'd like to make a few summary remarks. I'm here today to address our strategic, diplomatic, and program efforts with respect to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and to put into that context our assistance to the Palestinian people and to certain Palestinian institutions that are outside the control of the Hamas-led Palestinian Authority government. First, a few words about the diplomacy with respect to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. There are three tracks that we have before us: a bilateral Israeli-Palestinian track, a regional Arab-Israeli track, and an international component led by the United States and the Quartet. Secretary Rice's personal engagement has re-energized the bilateral track and preserved it through stresses and challenges posed most recently by the agreement for a national unity government amongst the Palestinians, by the formation of that government, and by turbulence in the Palestinian and Israeli domestic political environments. Knowing that it's not without its risks and with an uncertain promise, Israel has agreed to work on this bilateral track with the president of the Palestinians, President Abbas. Secretary Rice, in her most recent trip to the region, obtained agreement by President Abbas and Prime Minister Olmert to a regular series of summit meetings and to expand the content and substance of those meetings from an initial focus that they had agreed on practical issues to also add in elements of a political horizon for Palestinian statehood. Bilateral dialogue, in our judgment, is vital and irreplaceable to build confidence, lay the foundation for a meaningful negotiation eventually between the parties. The reaffirmation of the 2002 Arab Peace Initiative provides a regional political horizon for Israel that can complement efforts to advance the bilateral track while not replacing it. It also offers the prospect of a comprehensive end to the conflict. Following up on that Arab Peace Initiative, there have been meetings now between the Egyptian and Jordanian foreign ministers and the foreign minister of Israel in Egypt recently. And I expect that we will see further such meetings in the coming weeks and months. It is our judgment that there is an opportunity here, and we would like to see it explored and utilized. On the international track, thank you for recognizing in your opening remarks that there have been some accomplishments in that area to buttress our diplomacy. We are working to build momentum in the regional and bilateral tracks while maintaining the pressure on the PA government to fully commit in all its parts to the Quartet principles. We believe that a commitment to those principles has to remain the standard for international support for any Palestinian Authority government. President Abbas, to his credit, is personally and politically committed to those principles. We support his efforts to restore law and order and to build a partnership with Israel in pursuit of peace. And I would like to thank this committee for lending its voice in support of the practical work that is necessary for America to advance its interests in that respect, in particular by the extraordinary security assistance we're providing through our security coordinator. Since the election victory by Hamas in January of 2006, we had to undertake a full-scope redirection of our assistance programs to the Palestinian people so that they would not benefit in any way a government that was led by Hamas or in which Hamas had the sort of representation it does today. Our programs focus on humanitarian aid, promoting democracy and civil society, and supporting business and economic development. We're also proceeding, as General Dayton will shortly lay out, with non-lethal security assistance to the Presidential Guard and the Office of National Security, as well as certain financing for physical security and infrastructure upgrades at certain crossing points between Gaza and Israel. Deteriorating economic and security conditions in the Palestinian territories have left Palestinians with little hope that their daily lives can show improvement. The gross domestic product in the West Bank and Gaza has dropped sharply in the last few years. Over 60% of Palestinian households live below the standard there for measuring poverty. And nearly half of Palestinians rely on some form of food assistance to feed their families. To help in this, we've selected the UNRWA agency as our most significant channel to support humanitarian needs. And it's responsive to those needs among about over 1.5 million Palestinian refugees in the West Bank and Gaza. UNRWA's core activities in health, education, and social services are essential and support over 90,000 of the poorest and most vulnerable families. The Europeans and the World Bank continue to provide some significant assistance by this temporary international mechanism. We don't provide our assistance to that, as you all recognize. We do it directly or through UNRWA. But the TEM is a substantial enterprise. It has provided more than 250 million euros in direct assistance to a wide range of Palestinians in the last calendar year. And it does have considerable oversight and accountability and coordinates its mechanisms and payments with the Office of the President in an effort to see that the political credit accrues to that side of the Palestinian government. There are a number of programs that AID and our Middle East Partnership Initiative have that focus on building organization skills and structures among moderate Palestinian organizations, help support grassroots political activism, and help to support reform within Fatah and within other moderate political parties. Economic and political progress, however, can't take place without security. And security, as we continue to see, even as recently as this week, is very problematic, especially in Gaza. There have been over 200 Palestinians killed in factional violence, that is among themselves, since January. Given the size of the Palestinian community there, that's a very considerable loss of life. More than 500 others have been injured. And there have been dozens of Israelis injured, and one fatality in most recent violence, which has spilled over into Israel. When the National Unity Government was created in March, the overwhelming majority of the Palestinian people supported its establishment because they thought it might bring an end to such bloodshed among themselves. But unfortunately, as they are now learning, it hasn't put a stop to violence between Hamas and Fatah. We're early in the contracting phase of our security assistance programs, but we've tried to be responsive to congressional concern about the appropriate vetting and oversight, and we'd be happy to answer questions in that regard during this hearing. I believe, however, that the most recent violence in Gaza and the injuries and loss of life on all sides highlight the importance of this program. We'll likely seek your approval in the future for the use of the remaining monies in available FY06 carryover funds, which is about $27 million. We haven't decided on exactly on our options here. We haven't made those recommendations to our leadership yet, but we're in the course of doing that, and then we'll come back to consult with Congress on those uses. The purpose here, we feel, is a valid one. Law and order is at the core of our political efforts, and our political efforts can't succeed without security. So we need to contribute to a better environment conducive to make progress on the political horizon. Thank you for the opportunity to make these introductory remarks.
General Dayton.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, Congressman Pence. And as with Secretary Welch, obviously my comments are part of the record. Let me just summarize a few things I think are important. We're all aware of the deterioration of the security and economic situation in the territories, especially in Gaza, over the last several months. As a military man, I believe there's a point where inaction, a wait-and-see attitude, is no longer an option. The security assistance package that we have proposed and that was recently approved by the Congress is action, and I intend to make the most of it. Let me provide a few comments first, though, on the security situation, and then I'll address the status of our programs. As I've been telling many members of the Congress over the last 6 months, the situation has gotten to be quite dire in Gaza. We have a situation of lawlessness and outright chaos. There is very clear Hamas aggression against the legal security forces of President Abbas. We've seen a proliferation of small armed bands. Any group of 10 people that has weapons can call themselves an army or a brigade, and they're really under no one's effective control. And more worrisome still is the emergence of powerful clan-based militias in parts of Gaza that are clearly a threat to any law and order of the Palestinian security forces and to the Palestinian people. This chaotic situation is the reason why the USSC is focused on the legal, legitimate security forces in our attempts to reestablish law and order, which I would remark in all polling of the Palestinian people is their #1 issue. They want to live their lives in peace and security. They're fed up with this kind of chaos and violence, and the table is set for an intelligent effort to try to reestablish that. I would say the past 2 weeks, I just want to point out there are a few straws in the wind that we ought to take a look at. The situation remains dire, but a couple of interesting things happened. As Congressman Pence referred to, when Hamas attacked the Karni crossing, they ran into a force of the Presidential Guard that had actually received some training that was overseen by the USSC but sponsored, paid for by the Dutch. It was training on how you run a security of a border crossing, but it was nevertheless how you work together in a coordinated fashion. They were reinforced by the national security forces, which many people feel were totally useless. Not at all. They looked very good. The Hamas attack at Karni was repulsed, and the Presidential Guard is fully in control of the crossing again. As a matter of fact, the crossing was open today for commercial traffic. At Rafah, 500 soldiers, many of you have heard about, came back from training in Egypt for the national security forces, and they happened to arrive in the Rafah vicinity at the same time that Hamas staged an attack on the Rafah crossing. These 500 young people, fresh out of basic training, were organized. They knew how to work in a coordinated fashion. Training does pay off, and the Hamas attack in the Rafah area was likewise repulsed, and the Rafah crossing is totally under the control of the Palestinian Presidential Guard today. Mr. Chairman, in your comments, I note you talk about Hamas being continually on the rise. I would suggest that my view, and I live there day in and day out, as you know, is that that may not be the case anymore. I just want you to think of a few more things. First of all, their attacks this time were particularly brutal. This brutality really backfired. The executive force of Hamas, again, in public opinion polling, is extremely unpopular among the people in Gaza. There have been numerous reports about the Friday prayer services that occurred across Gaza and how the Hamas-affiliated imams tried to stir up the Palestinian people against Fatah and were greeted with people who walked out of the sermons or, in a few cases, actually chased the imams out of the mosque. There are some hopeful signs. There are things that we should be looking at that we may want to try to encourage. But I must emphasize yet again, the legal security forces of the Palestinian president still lack the opportunity to achieve what they need to achieve, which is law and order. My point is, though, this was not a replay of January, where Hamas swept across Gaza in great successes. This time, they didn't succeed very well at all. You know, the United States is, frankly, in a very interesting position as far as I'm concerned, because we are leading, through the actions of this Congress, the international effort to positively affect this worrisome situation. The Security Assistance Plan that you have authorized me to just begin to implement is pointing the way forward for all international and regional allies. The programs I'm going to discuss here in a minute are truly important to advance America's national interests, to deliver security to the Palestinians, and in the process, preserve and protect the interests of the State of Israel. We are providing, if I can crib a term from Secretary Welch, we're providing a security horizon that frankly has never existed before. I'm focusing on 3 areas. You know these well. One of them is improving the security of the Gaza crossings, particularly at Kearney. The Congress has authorized me to expend $16 million in assistance for security infrastructure improvements to be implemented by USAID. I would report to you that the temporary security zone is almost complete. This has been supported by the United Kingdom, Canada, the Dutch, and the Norwegians. The master plan for the final project will be finished in midsummer, and construction will begin shortly thereafter. The U.S. $16 million, I guarantee you, is attracting other donations, and within a year you will see at Kearney a crossing that meets international standards and one that will protect the security not only of the Palestinians but the Israelis who share that border crossing. The Presidential Guard is ready now for its infusion of non-lethal equipment and training, and this is a very important point. We will focus on protection to the office of the President and VIPs. We'll focus on critical logistic and administrative functions, management of security at the border crossing points, and crisis response. Training venues have been selected. The curriculum is well advanced, the curriculum development. Equipment lists are being finalized, and in this, Mr. Chairman, I assure you we are keeping the Israelis informed of our progress as we go along and do this. The vetting protocols are set. Vetting has actually begun for both the Leahy requirements and for the Foreign Terrorist Organization requirements, both of which are being overseen in this case by the State Department's INL. As I said, I've kept the Israelis aware. Coordination continues, and our funds should start making a difference on the ground by midsummer. For the Office of National Security, which was another $3 million, this is very important. This small entity in the Office of the President will become the brains of Palestinian security sector transformation. It will be the area where we can go to for a partner in the security sense that will guide the activities of the legal security forces throughout the Palestinian territories. Mr. Chairman, I know you well. I enjoy talking with you. I just have to tell you that you caught my attention when you used the phrase, the graveyard of stillborn American security plans. I would suggest to you maybe not this time. This Congress has enabled me to begin implementing the first significant Palestinian security initiative since Oslo. That is a major, in my mind, historic development. The Palestinians have assumed ownership of this through a group called the Technical Team for Reform, which I have discussed with you on your visits to the region. These are professional, intelligent, dedicated Palestinians, and we are making tremendous progress on right-sizing, downsizing, and professionalizing the legal Palestinian security forces. In all of this, you have the United States in the lead, ably assisted by the Canadians and the British members of my team. And as you know, Mr. Chairman, we live there. And I firmly believe that you make changes in this world the way the Romans did, by being on the ground, by getting your feet dirty in the mud and working with the people on the scene. This committee and this Congress have put us on the right track. My team, with your leadership, has created a security horizon, I think, for the Palestinian people. And I think this is a really fundamentally new development, and it's one we have to watch. I couldn't help seeing your analogy to the Yankees. I love baseball analogies. And I would use one back at you. I would say that we are kind of, we're late in the ball game here, and we're behind. There's 2 out, but we have our best clutch hitter at the plate, and the pitcher is beginning to tire on the opposing team. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank members of this committee for the support you've given us. I think we may be on the right track for sure. Thank you.
Thank you, General. Mr. Ward.
Congressman Pence, thanks so much for inviting me back to appear before you today. And I, too, appreciate the opportunity to testify on the political, economic, and security situation in the West Bank and Gaza. Much has taken place since USAID last had the opportunity to brief the subcommittee a year ago. And I will try to describe and answer questions about how our assistance program is serving overall U.S. government policy objectives and explain the vetting and anti-terrorist measures that we've put in place to safeguard the funds that the Congress appropriates. We will not work with Hamas or any other foreign terrorist organization, but we should continue to support, as you said, moderate institutions and elements of Palestinian society, whether in the private sector, moderate municipalities, civil society, or independent media, to counterbalance extremist views and positions. Our assistance remains focused on two key objectives: averting a humanitarian disaster and laying the foundation for the creation of a viable, democratic Palestinian state. In July of last year, Secretary Rice announced a Palestinian humanitarian assistance strategy, as Ambassador Welch said, to support basic human needs, secure and expand democracy, and promote private sector development. Let me say a few words about what we're doing in each of those areas. On basic human needs, as everybody knows, economic declines and insecurity have resulted in significant humanitarian concerns, particularly in Gaza. The Palestinian Ministry of Health faces severe shortages of drugs and medical supplies, most significantly for cancer and dialysis treatment. The UN reports that 49% of the population is now food insecure, up from 36% in 2005. Over 1 million people, including approximately 200,000 children under the age of 5, lack access to enough safe drinking water. Proper sewage treatment and disposal is nearly non-existent outside of the urban centers. In fact, just 6 weeks ago, a huge sewage pond collapsed and flooded a village in Gaza, damaging 150 homes and killing 5 people. In this challenging environment, the U.S. gives priority to the daily health care and nutrition needs of the most vulnerable Palestinians, mothers and children under age 5, through the private health care system. We've undertaken small-scale emergency repair of water, sanitation, solid waste services, and provided nearly 350,000 people, that's almost 10% of the population, with water, sanitation, education, hygiene, and health assistance. When that sewage pond collapsed, I'm proud to say that we responded immediately with survival kits for every affected family and organized local residents into a volunteer cleanup campaign. The United States is the single largest contributor to the World Food Program, providing over $35 million of food assistance in 2006. With our help, WFP distributed 47,000 metric tons of essential food commodities to 300,000 Palestinians in just a 10-month period. On the democracy front, it's critical that we remain engaged with and support Palestinians who reject Hamas and other extremists. We're working with Palestinian leaders, particularly those elected to municipal councils, to provide much-needed assistance to their communities. Currently, we're working with 20 communities to help municipal leaders assess and meet the needs of their communities. We're also providing flexible and rapid in-kind grants to strengthen civil society organizations and community groups. Examples include support for community centers, youth clubs, small community-built infrastructure, and public safety improvements. In the Gaza, for example, 3 communities elected to use funding provided by USAID to pave roads, knowing that this would generate needed employment opportunities for local youth and provide a safer route for their children to get to school. We're also strengthening independent media, which is under the threat of a growing number of radio and TV stations that are owned and funded by various political factions. We're helping independent station owners develop business plans and raise revenues that will allow them to maintain their editorial independence. Nearly 100 media professionals have been trained this year alone. Another important tactic in the war of ideas is to continue providing scholarships for future Palestinian leaders who share our goals for the future. Experience has shown time and again that scholarship recipients who study in the United States gain a positive view of our country that sticks with them throughout their professional careers. And all scholarship recipients studying in the U.S. have been thoroughly vetted to ensure that they have no ties to terrorism. On the private sector side, as the General has said, creating a more stable business environment and better security will improve the Palestinians' economic future. To that end, we're proud to be working with General Dayton to develop plans for the necessary infrastructure and security upgrades on the Palestinian side of the Kearney crossing. This work, as he said, which will begin very soon, includes constructing large roads and primary, secondary, and inspection areas, as well as other components. The work on the Palestinian side of the Kearney border crossing complements our work on the Israeli side of the border. With the support of a cargo scanner that USAID provided to the Israelis, they have extended the operating hours at Kearney, which has increased the number of vehicle crossings. And trade means jobs, and jobs bring hope. Now, how do we tell our story? I know this is a subject of particular interest to the chairman. USAID in the West Bank and Gaza publicizes its projects through press releases, media campaigns, branding, and press tours. Following a recent media campaign that included TV, radio, billboards, and newspaper ads, polling data showed increased public awareness of the contributions of the American people. Of the Palestinians who saw our outreach campaign, 50% said that our projects are important for their well-being, and almost 60% said that they believe the United States is sincere about helping the Palestinian people. And finally, how do we safeguard the funds that you provide to us? As guardians of the taxpayers' money, we take very seriously our responsibility to ensure the appropriate and secure use of foreign assistance funds. Since 2001, we've vetted the recipients of U.S. assistance in the West Bank and Gaza. Our office in Tel Aviv utilizes the most comprehensive screening and vetting process at work in any USAID program around the world. With good input from the GAO and our own Inspector General, it's getting better all the time. The vetting process itself involves searches of databases maintained by U.S. intelligence agencies and other U.S. government sources, including the lists maintained by the Office of Foreign Assets Control at Treasury. Before issuing grants, we require all organizations to sign an anti-terrorism certification that they do not provide material support or resources for terrorism. And once a grant has been made, all NGOs are required to submit quarterly financial reports on how their funds are spent. And larger grantees and contractors' local costs are audited annually by our Inspector General's office in Cairo. Clearly, Mr. Chairman, the situation in West Bank and Gaza remains tense, particularly in Gaza. We salute the fine Foreign Service nationals and employees of our contractors and grantees who remain dedicated to improving the lives of their fellow Palestinians. With these brave Palestinians, we remain committed to a more prosperous and hopeful future. Thank you.
Thank the panel for their testimony. Let me start by saying to General Dayton, my criticism, if it was, certainly was not of you. You are a major league player. You are our Babe Ruth out there. But the problem is you're the coach. And my exact quote, if you would recall, was that the problem is that the Palestinian Authority does not have a singular, exclusive authority. We don't know who the captain of their team is. We don't know who's pitching. It seems to be you have a pitcher's duel, and the pitchers that are dueling are both on the same team, or supposedly on the same team, the Palestinians team. And the pitching staff is pretty thin. The bench is non-existent. The farm teams are a lot of people who are unknown. We don't know what's going to happen there. Fault doesn't lie with the coach. They have to get their act together, and the concern and the frustration that I've expressed is not any lack of confidence in the effort that our American coaching system, under your leadership and guidance, which I think is one of the most encouraging things that I've seen in all my years of watching this thing go into constant spirals. I am greatly encouraged by what you're trying to do, and the glimmers of hope are certainly there. But this whole new element of having a Palestinian side that stands against itself is the thing that I'm scratching my head about and can't figure out how they are going to pull this together when the team isn't the team. It's basically on one team, half the players trying to sabotage the others, and we don't know who's going to win that. Maybe you'd want to respond to that. And by the way, I am a Met fan.
Well, I learned something, which is not to trade sports analogies with you. I obviously won't win. I think that, yes, we are indeed coaching. My point is that the farm team is, I better not do that. My point is that there are hopeful signs. When you train these people and you actually invest in them, they take pride in what they do. The Presidential Guard at Kearney and its behavior in the last 2 weeks, to me, is one of the most encouraging things I've seen. But remember, they've been trained, and the United States, it's well known throughout Gaza that the United States has said, you guys are probably winners, and we're going to put money behind you, and we're going to turn you into a force for good and law and order for the Palestinian people. The only people who don't like this are Hamas and the terror elements, okay? And my point really was, I'm going to do it again. You know, the Mets in '69, you know, from last place to first place, it can happen with the correct guidance and the correct coaching.
I missed that 7th game because I was in Israel at the time, and my wife had my seat. It reminds me all the time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know exactly where you're coming from on this, but okay.
Let me, for a couple of minutes, at least before I turn to my partner, Mr. Pence, turn to the financing, which has raised some concerns and bears some scrutiny. This temporary international mechanism, Ambassador Welch, who does it provide assistance to? Is it the Palestinian Authority? Is it to the NGOs? Is it to individual Palestinians? Who gets the money in this mechanism?
Originally, Mr. Chairman, when this mechanism was instituted, it was called temporary because the international community was looking for a solution to enable assistance to Palestinians without allowing it to spill over to helping the government, which was, at the time the so-called TEM was formulated, was fully in the hands of Hamas. As I recall, and while we participated in formulating the sort of normative rules of the TEM, we don't use it for any of our assistance. It has several components. One part has been to provide certain allowances to needy Palestinians on a needs basis. Another part has been to satisfy utility bills that are run up by the Palestinians because they get some of their essential services from Israeli providers and don't have the means to pay for it. And without those essential services, water and electricity, there'd be even more humanitarian consequences. That's the basic structure of the TEM. It's been used for a considerable amount of European assistance, but not all of it. Like the United States, there are some members of the European Union and some other European countries who have chosen to make direct contributions to NGOs or to other humanitarian purposes within the Palestinian territories. For example, Russia last year made a contribution to pay certain hospital bills. This didn't go directly to the Palestinian Authority either. More or less consistent behavior, in other words. We believe that having the TEM has been highly useful because it's helped to address these humanitarian concerns, and on the other hand, has provided a legitimate channel by which humanitarian assistance might be afforded.
Who does the monitoring of the end use of the money? Is it us? Is it the quartet? Is it the Palestinians themselves?
The
How did the question is, how do we know that money going through this temporary mechanism that we've now evidently made clear to our European partners and others that they can use without subjecting themselves to U.S. sanctions? How does this, the concern is that it doesn't in the end fall in to the hands of the wrong people. How do we know that?
Well, I think it's divided into two parts. One part is the World Bank manages, and so they do the auditing, all the checks. Another part, the utility payments, is fairly transparent how those are done. Just as a reminder, Mr. Chairman, the European Union treats Hamas like we do. It's an illegal organization, and they cannot provide assistance directly to Hamas. So I think they have the same standard and interest in avoiding any aid going to them.
Let me turn to Mr. Pence.
Thank you, Chairman. And this panel never disappoints, and I'm grateful for the candor and the hope that I'm going to be forced to leave this hearing with, because of the respect that I have for the extraordinary careers of those that have offered testimony. Ambassador Welch, your statement made 3 references, but your informal remarks as well, to Palestinian moderates. Are there Palestinian moderates? Given the conduct of the Palestinian leadership, and even some of its public at large over the last 18 months, just ask that blunt question first. And secondly, what do we do to promote and encourage the ascendancy of precisely the kind of Palestinians that Mr. Ward just rightly celebrated? People that are interested in civilization, people that are interested in the well-being of their neighbors and their families and in security. But let me just ask that very broad question. Are there Palestinian moderates? And if there are some, how do we get more of them?
Thank you for asking. It's, I believe, a critically important question, because when we look at what's happening day to day, I think there's an easy and facile tendency for people to get very discouraged and to believe that basically there are no good intentions on the part of either those who are involved in politics among the Palestinians or Palestinian people themselves sometimes. And it's easy to get discouraged by some of the images we see, both the violent ones, but also the messages conveyed, as the chairman mentioned, through certain of the partisan media organizations. But, sir, let's take the Palestinian legislative election as an example of where public sympathies might lie. Hamas won a majority in the PLC, but it did so with 43% of the vote. That means there's another 47% out there that didn't vote for him, 57%. I don't know whether those are moderates, all of them, or maybe some of them have a different political sympathy, but it's clear to me that not every single Palestinian subscribes to the extremist ideology of Hamas. It'd be wrong to conclude that's the case because they got a legislative majority. President Abbas, who subscribes to all the principles for peace that the international community has endorsed, was elected with over 60% of the vote. Mm-hmm. So plainly, the Palestinian people are willing to follow that vision of moderation. And I think our challenge is to provide, both by our direct encouragement, as Mr. Ward will remark on here in a moment, but also by creating the right political context so that people will see that they have a chance, that this sort of vision can succeed.
But if I may, Ambassador, forgive me. You look at not only the violence in recent weeks, but those public images, the broadcast airwaves, the printed media, and the polling data really suggest, and I ask rhetorically, of course, are there any? But you know, your sense is that there is a significant part of the Palestinian population that is not hard over into extremism and
Yes, sir, absolutely.
the categorical rejection of the Quartet principles.
Absolutely. And I think unless we are siding with them, both in practical ways to give them a stronger voice, but also in creating the right political context so that their hopes for peace and security would be realized, that we'd be abandoning them. Right. And that would, I think, add to the threat facing that society and the threat, frankly, facing Israel, because it would hand a victory to those people who mean to do harm to both.
Thank you. Let me, in the interest of time and other members who are here, let me shift some questions to General Dayton, if I can. And I appreciated you expanding on the Kearney Crossing success. You did not expand on the fact that that was part of the Dayton plan. And I appreciate your humility in not making reference to the fact that that part of your strategy was to train the Presidential Guard and improve the operation at the Kearney Crossing. So we're, on this side of the bench, we're pretty accustomed to taking credit, whether it's deserved or not. I'd like to extend that credit to you, General, and thank you for that. The thing I want to know about the Kearney Crossing success, though, General, was that a personnel success story, as I thought I caught in some of your testimony, or was it that some hardening at the crossing, or is the hardening that's been authorized, I think you talked about $16 million that Congress has approved, is that yet to come? And because it seems to me, if it was about infrastructure and hardening, that's one thing. If it was about people, that's a much more hopeful note. General.
Well, the initial attack was on the Palestinian training camp of the Presidential Guard, which is outside the temporary strengthening of the border area.
Okay.
So it was people. They then took refuge behind the wall. The other thing I would indicate here is that the commander of the Presidential Guard was not even in Gaza at the time. This was local initiative by local commanders who had been trained and then called for help from Gaza City, and the Presidential Guard came to reinforce them from Gaza City, knocking over Hamas roadblocks all the way down. So it's, in some ways, a more encouraging scene for the Presidential Guard and their capabilities that appear to be developing now with a little bit of training than even I had expected. So I'm encouraged with this.
Well, I think it's, I think that is significant, and I appreciate you amplifying that point. Let me ask you, General, and I might also ask for a response from the ambassador on this. As I said in my statement, the challenge here is how do we support those Palestinian moderates like Mahmoud Abbas and his government without supporting Hamas. And there was testimony today about the non-lethal aid to the Presidential Guard. I will be honest with you, as someone who feels that this country since 1948 has had a historical and moral obligation to see to the security of the State of Israel. Having been she wasn't our idea, but we were her birth mother this time around in many ways, or at least a midwife. And I must tell you, General, and I think the chairman and I are very much in concert of mind about this. I worry about this issue and the subject of this hearing, relative to the subject of this hearing, more than any other issue. And I really would invite you, General, and the ambassador. Can you speak to that? Can you give us your level of confidence that we are not inadvertently arming those who will, in some reasonably foreseeable point in the future, take arm against that ally that we so cherish.
Well, look, Congressman, I agree with you perhaps more than you can ever imagine. And whenever I talk to groups in the area where I live, I make this case very clear, that nothing we do to strengthen the Palestinian security capability will be targeted against the State of Israel. That's simple. And there are very practical measures that this Congress has insisted upon that will be executed to the letter of the law to ensure that the people that we provide assistance to are vetted carefully for either membership or affiliation with terrorist organizations or for human rights abuses. Having said that, again, we don't just throw money at this problem. First of all, the Americans are going to spend the money through American channels only. We're not giving any money to Palestinians. Secondly, I'm not going away, and my team's not going away. And we watch this every single day. And so I can give you a pretty good assurance that you picked the right area, the Presidential Guard, to start. I think it's a great start. And it is the right size, it has the right mission that we can do this in a very effective manner. And I give you that assurance. That is something that will work. And the Presidential Guard will not become a threat to Israel. And I would just point out that the Israelis are, my experience with them, they've come to rely on the Presidential Guard's capabilities at the border crossings. They encourage it. The Presidential Guard is something that they feel very comfortable with, and I think that's significant.
Ambassador, you may or may not wish to respond to that, but I'd welcome it.
Just a brief further reflection. It's a feature of every arrangement that Israel has entered into with the Palestinians that there is some recognition of the need for security from the Palestinian side. Oslo, for example, contemplates that there will be certain security organizations on the Palestinian side. As I think we've all learned in the period since, there is some risk attendant to that too. I mean, that's why they had to negotiate on it, and that's why they're still having to negotiate on it. Israel does accept a certain amount of that risk, and we work with them to manage it. I think we all recognize that this is a kind of world, however, where it can't be eliminated entirely, and we'll do the best we can, certainly with the U.S. assistance monies, to make sure that we do a good job on this. But I don't see that there are other alternatives that are better that would help to do this, and certainly the Israeli government hasn't communicated with us on those things. I worry a little bit, Congressman, about the scope of General Dayton's program. I mean, this is an ambitious effort. We're loading a lot onto this, and the Presidential Guard is not, it's not an army, and it's not a very large entity, and it's being called upon to do a lot of responsibilities. When you all visit the occupied territories, for example, you are protected when you go to see Palestinians by some elements of the Presidential Guard. That's another mission we load upon them too. And I think we have to recognize that that's a difficulty on their side. We're putting a lot of stress on these organizations, and there's a lot of internal stress among the Palestinians themselves too.
Oh, well, let me just conclude by again thanking this panel and leaving you with a challenging thought. I didn't question Mr. Ward, but I'm so greatly moved by the work that USAID is doing on the ground there. The former chairman of this committee, Henry Hyde, wrote a provocative piece that I haven't been able to get out of my mind for several years, asking a rhetorical question, whether or not it is possible to plant democracy where there is not a fundamental respect for human life present. And I would just encourage each of you in your various roles to continue to water the plant of fundamental values and the institutions that support values, religious, cultural, and otherwise, because it ultimately seems to me that our hope here, while the Dayton Plan may buy us time, our hope here ultimately has to be grounded in the emergence of a growing class of moderate Palestinians who simply decide, for the sake of their children and their grandchildren, to live in peace and freedom and in a fundamental respect for their neighbors that has not been present for generations in that region. But I thank the panel. I thank the chairman for calling this important hearing.
Thank you. Before I turn to Mr. Costa, let me just make a comment, if I would. Forgive us if we press very hard in the area of delving into where the money is going and things like that. It's not because of any lack of confidence in what any of you or our government is doing, because we are fundamentally believers. Some of us may be fundamentalist believers, others may believe in fundamentals, but we believe basically, and we're on the same wavelength in the basic goodness of people. And that's why collectively, over the years, even before us, this Congress and previous Congresses has spent tons and tons and tons of our nation's largesse, billions of dollars, in trying to make the situation better for people in this part of the world, all people in this part of the world. Billions to aid the Palestinians from us and from others. And when we look around to try to see where it's gone, we don't see it. And to hear something discouraging that the Palestinians have to have the money to pay their electric bills to individual Israeli electric companies because they don't make their own electricity. I mean, electricity is not like oil, where it's either under your soil or not. The Israelis make their own electricity. Why aren't the Palestinians? Where do all this money go if they don't have an electrical plant? Where do all the money go if they don't even have their own currency? They have to use other people's change. They don't have a Palestinian dollar. They didn't create a banking system. They didn't create an infrastructure. I wake up one morning a couple years ago to find out that a bowling alley on Long Island, near where I live, is in part financed by an Arafat investment company, through money that I guess was in part U.S. taxpayer monies that went to help Palestinian people that he stole. And we don't see the goodness of our giving. You know, we don't want anybody to come and pat us on the back. That's really not what this is all about. But we'd like to see people living better because it improves the neighborhood, if nothing else, and we'll benefit from that for sure. So our questioning about the money and the system is not because of anything that we're currently doing, but because of an historic fact that we have not done our job in the oversight and insisting that the people who were there through all these layers of several generations were not really on the stick at the time that they needed to be, and to try to come up as best we can with some kind of guarantees that what we're doing now, and we don't want this well to dry up. We're not saying stopping the flow of money and the help and the aid. We don't want to turn off anybody's faucet or take food off of anybody's table. We want to help with that. But in the end, we want to see it become better. Mr. Costas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for holding this important subcommittee hearing this afternoon. I share with both you and Congressman Pence the deep concern that we try to do everything we can to bring the Palestinians and the Israelis together to a long-term peace agreement that will recognize each other's rights. And of course, we know of the problems that have been developed in keeping that from happening. To continue your theme, and when you look at the elections that you referenced, Ambassador Welch, and the success of Hamas over President Abbas's party and what he inherited, it's my sense that a lot of that success was due to corruption and the level of the economy within Palestine, and the Palestinian people simply looking for some other kind of an alternative. I guess to make reference to an earlier comment here with regards to the New York Mets and the chairman of that 1969 season, I remember quite well that part of that great success for that team was a young right-hander by the name of Tommy Terrific Seaver, who went on to win over 300 games, a fellow from Fresno, from my hometown. And absolutely. And I'm wondering, where is their Tom Seaver? Because we look for President Abbas to fill this void in what he inherited, and we know that he inherited, I would say, at best a mess, and at worst a cesspool of corruption. And if we're going to win over the hearts and minds of the Palestinians, it just seems to me that there has to be some hope among the people that Hamas is not going to improve their lives at the end of the day. Because I think that winning the hearts and minds of the Palestinians has to lead to how you bring the fundamentals in to improve the economy and the lives of these people to exist. As the chairman said, they don't have a banking system, they don't have any of the fundamental elements of a governmental structure. So my question to, and Ambassador Welch, you might want to try it, Mr. Ward, you might want to try it, where is the hope that you believe that Abbas is trying to make the necessary, because corruption, I think, and whether we're talking about Palestine or Iraq or other parts of, in that part of the world just seems to be, if not endemic, a way of life. And I've said that repeatedly. Mr. Welch.
Thank you, Congressman. Well, let me take a couple of points out of that and ask Mr. Ward also to contribute something on how our programs are directed to address some of the issues you identified. First, you're quite right, sir, and as the chairman mentioned, President Abbas inherited a system that was full of all kinds of problems, holes, and vulnerabilities. Let's take the Palestine Investment Fund as an example. This is an entity through which a lot of Palestinian money sources unknown was invested. When Salam Fayyad was finance minister under the Fatah-led government, he participated in a complete reorganization of the Palestinian Investment Fund.
Supposedly had some initial success.
He did, and to this day, I believe it's managed significantly more responsibly. Second, you quite rightly say that there are institutional deficiencies on the side of the Palestinian Authority. That it's not a state, and it therefore doesn't have the elements of statehood, and this is a significant gap that needs to be filled. And part of the reason we have this third track, which I call the international track, sir, in my opening remarks, is because I think there's a lot of work the international community and members of the international community like ourselves can do to help build more responsible and accountable institutions of governance. That's what General Dayton's doing on the security side. That gets a lot of attention, but that doesn't mean it's not occurring in some other areas as well. When we restructured our assistance program last year after the Hamas government came in, we segregated an ability to continue funds flowing to independent organizations, Election Commission, for example, the Monetary Authority, so that we could try to continue to build those institutions. Finally, do the Palestinian people recognize that, and not merely that the party who had government before did some bad things and was held to be corrupt and held accountable at the polls, but is the current Hamas party having failed when it had government fully in its control, also held accountable. I think there's some public polling evidence to suggest that that's the case. But of course, there hasn't been another election yet to test that proposition. Perhaps if I could ask Mr. Ward to make a couple of comments on how our assistance programs are directed in these areas.
And is President Abbas capable of a strong season, to use the Seaver analogy?
Well, you and I should be talking about the San Francisco Giants, but
We're hopeful.
we'll get, yeah, we're ever hopeful. Let me bring it down to the community level. What if there's a Tom Seaver who's the mayor of a municipality that is not Hamas? Our assistance program has found him or her and is providing direct assistance to that community so that he can demonstrate to his community that he's listening to them in setting priorities for that community, and he's helping to deliver the priorities that that community has identified. And we're not just helping him. We're also teaching that community something about accountability, because they are involved in the decision-making process. They know what they need, they know what they've been promised, and they know that we are keeping track of the funds to pay for the goods and services. There's a community next to that community that's not run by a moderate Fatah member. It's run by the other guys. And one of the hopes of our program, and I very much appreciate that we're talking so much about hope today, is that the people in that community, and everybody talks to each other, are going to see what's going on in the community next door that's receiving help from the United States or maybe from the TIM. And they're going to see that their community was involved in how decisions are made, and that their community leaders are accountable because everything is public, and that the community is strengthened and the community leaders are strengthened, and that at the end of the day, when the next election that Ambassador Welch refers to, we might see a different result.
Well, Mr. Ward, you're describing what I've thought sometimes out loud, that maybe a selective mini Marshall Plan that was done with cause and effect and the proper sort of resources to reward success and failure. And it seems to me that if that is done on a very regimented fashion, maybe we can, in fact, win over the hearts and minds of the Palestinians in a way that makes sense. Two quick questions, if you mind, Mr. Chairman. One, and it gets back to earlier comments that were made, do you expect the Europeans to hold firm on the financial boycott on this Hamas-Fatah unity government unless it meets the three criteria set by the quartet?
Congressman, this is a very important consideration for us and a key target in our diplomacy. We just a few days ago concluded an exchange of letters with the European Union and European Commission, which clarifies that assistance should only flow to certain accounts. Otherwise, it could be implicated by U.S. law and regulation. We were asked that question by European representatives in order that they could understand what would be permissible for them to do with their assistance. Whether they'll avail themselves of this track or not, I don't know, since most of them tend to use either direct assistance or assistance through the TIM. My belief is that other governments, including Arab governments, will use these accounts for their contributions to the Palestinian people. If that's the case, then it is our belief that those will be managed in such a manner so as not to benefit the Hamas part of the government.
My last question, if you don't mind, Mr. Chairman. The rocket attacks that have been taking place recently in Israel from the Gaza Strip, it seems to me unlikely that Israel is going to continue to move forward with the proposed benchmarks on access and movement if they continue. And I'm wondering, in your opinion, why doesn't Hamas pay a political price among Palestinians for choosing this type of terrorism attacks that clearly has repercussions. And maybe the cause and effect, and maybe General, you may want to respond to this, it takes longer to make itself visible, but it just seems to me that when you're talking about winning the hearts and minds, politically, there seems to ultimately have to be a price to pay.
Congressman, I'll take kind of a security answer to this, and then perhaps Ambassador Welch would like to add. I'm convinced that one reason why the rocket attacks continue by Hamas and others who are sympathetic to the Hamas agenda is simple fear on the part of the people that could stop them. Okay, they go in people's yards. They shoot these things from people's fields, from their yards, from their backyards, and because there are no effective forces for law and order in those areas, because frankly they have been allowed to deteriorate so badly, people are simply afraid to stop it, and so Hamas does pay a price eventually. I'm one of those who believe that one thing we're trying to do in delivering law and order and security is we're enabling Abbas to win and his forces to win the next election. Because I think the way you get rid of Hamas is the same way Hamas got in, which is through the ballot box. And Palestinians actually believe in voting. They think this is very important. So I would tell you that, you've heard talk from Ambassador Welch about the political horizon. I think that's very important to take away the appeal of the opposition, the rejectionism. But at the same time, you have to have effective law and order on the ground so that the people themselves can stop this. It's like being in a community where there are no police.
And that law and order doesn't exist.
And it doesn't exist, but that's one of the things that this particular committee and this Congress is helping us to reestablish, I believe, by starting with the Presidential Guard and then moving on from there.
Thank you, Mr. Costa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Fortenberry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Obviously, I've come way late in the hearing, so I don't have the benefit of your earlier testimony, but perhaps if I could ask to give your assessment and update of any new contributions, new initiatives among the pan-Arab world, responsible members of regional governments in the neighborhood to the Palestinian-Israeli questions that are outstanding.
Several weeks ago, the Arab League met at the summit level in Saudi Arabia and confirmed again what they call the Arab Peace Initiative, a proposal they put on the table and voted in early 2002, the first time. They essentially reconfirmed it, not changing it, at this meeting in Riyadh. And they agreed subsequently that they would go explain it at several different levels to Israel and to the international community. They have put this proposition directly to the Israelis through the Jordanian and Egyptian foreign ministers in a meeting in Egypt just a couple of weeks ago. Foreign Minister Livni from Israel went over to Egypt. My understanding from the Egyptians and Jordanians is they intend to follow that up by a visit of their own to Israel. I believe they're timing that to reflect, to have some ability to have that visit come in the best political atmosphere, and given developments in Israel, they're waiting a bit. Second, a delegation from the Arab League met with the quartet membership in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, on the margins of the conference on Iraq, to explain the Arab initiative to those of us in the quartet. Secretary Rice was present at that meeting. Subsequent to that, just last Monday, another delegation went from the Arab League to Brussels to explain it all to all the European Union foreign ministers. So they seem to have a pretty organized campaign to explain what they're doing with the Arab initiative. We see some promise, sir, in this regional track, that it might provide some support to the bilateral track. It can't replace it because, after all, at the end of the day, peace can only be built between Israel and those countries, Lebanon and Syria, with which it doesn't have a peace arrangements, and most importantly of all, with the Palestinians. But we do think it's an important complement to it. And it's encouraging to us that there seems to be some interest on the Arab side in moving that forward. And there's some receptivity to Israel in hearing about it and commenting upon it. That doesn't mean that Israel has to agree with all parts of it. Frankly, the United States doesn't necessarily agree with all parts of it. But the idea that there is an offer out there for peace is, I think, an important one, and perhaps adds to our opportunities available right now to try and advance this cause.
Thank you. There have been some reports in the press that the administration has, in an exchange of letters with the Europeans that hopefully the committee might be able to get a look at, agreed to allow the Europeans to participate and assist the PLO through some special separate account set up that would be controlled by the Palestinian Authority Finance Minister, Salam Fayyad, who I know and have a lot of confidence in. He seems to be a great guy. What is the purpose of this account? Who's going to control it? Him exclusively? Who's going to audit it? If we're not participating in providing money through those accounts, are these letters just to guarantee to the other participants in the account that they would not be subject to U.S. Sanctions by doing that? And why is this account needed? How do we guarantee that these monies don't fall into the wrong hands? And what does it do that the TIM doesn't?
Mr. Chairman, there is an exchange of letters we've concluded with the European Union and Commission, and I'm happy to make a copy available to you and other members of the committee. When Hamas came into power and controlled all of the government after the election last year, we reconfirmed some restrictions we had on any assistance going to the Hamas government. And under U.S. law, U.S. persons or entities can't provide any material support to a terrorist organization. And this means that banks, U.S. entities, are not willing to participate in such transfers. When the National Unity Government was formed, we faced the question, do we change these regulations in any way? And our policy decision was, no, we would not. We would keep them in effect. Well, what that meant is that people didn't know exactly what the implications might be for the controls, and we were asked to clarify that, which is what we did in this exchange of letters. My guess is that the European Union is unlikely to use this PLO account very much. Others in Europe may use it. I think Norwegian contributions may go there. Accounts existed before. It is under the authority of President Abbas, and it will be audited by I think the Palestinians have selected a renowned international firm, Ernst & Young, to do that auditing function so that they can ensure the proper accountability of funds going there. Our policy view is that people want to assist Palestinians. I mean, we think that's a worthy objective, and the question is how to do it and what's the right way to do it. And we think this provides the appropriate mechanism with the right controls.
Various players in the Arab world or Arab banks can transfer money through that system?
Well, sir, I'm prepared to speak more with you and any other interested members of the committee in a different setting in that regard. But again, I think we want to meet this impulse that there is to provide assistance to Palestinians with a responsible and effective way for that to be done. I don't want to embarrass any particular governments by speaking out about how they do their assistance.
I have no compunctions about doing that. Shame on them if they're doing the wrong thing, but is this arrangement specific to this finance minister? If Mr. Fayed resigns yet again and is replaced by somebody, does that person automatically have the authority to control those accounts? Or does this disappear with him? Do we?
As I mentioned, this is an account that in the end is under the control of the president. We would, I think, take a very careful evaluation if the personalities, plural, were to change on that side. It's a system that has been used before and in which we have some confidence. But again, if the personalities were to change, we'd have another look at it, just as we had another look at it when the National Unity Government came into being.
I think it speaks volumes that we have to revise our policy with the change in players, because there's no system in this entity that we have confidence in, and have to reevaluate everything we do every time there's a change in personnel. I don't know that it makes any more sense than one league having a designated hitter and the other league not. We will take up your invitation, and the committee would be anxious to meet with you under different circumstances to explore this further and determine at that point if there is further need to have a public hearing after that. Would you like to say a word about Lebanon? I understand that there has been some type of bombing there today.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, at the outset of the hearing, got a message on this evil device that I have to carry with me all the time, and that there has been another bombing in Lebanon this evening, Lebanon time. This is the third such event in just slightly over that number of days. I believe this is in a majority Druze area of the country. So now in succession, whoever's doing these things seems to have targeted every confessional community there. This is deplorable that this is happening, and yet another example of the grave concern that we have about those who want to disturb this peace and security in Lebanon and try and work against the interests of the majority of the Lebanese people. We're supporting the government of Lebanon and trying to bring those who are responsible for these things to account. And we warn those who are perpetrating them, whether they're inside or outside of Lebanon, that they will be held to account.
Thank you for that. And with the gratitude of the committee, this very distinguished panel is thanked for their service to our country. You're great Americans, and thank you for participating in our hearing. Committee stands adjourned.